The WNBA, the gift that keeps on giving. You know who hasn't been given any gifts from the WNBA? Caitlin Clark or Caitlin Clark's parents. And her parents have drawn the line in the sand. They have made it very clear with where they stand, and they are not happy with the WNBA, with this whole Indiana Fever Stephanie White situation.
When you start out a game on an 8-2 run and Caitlin Clark is popping off and you pull her out of the game and you play 11 players in the first quarter, that's intentional sabotage. That's a coach pulling a game plan out of her rear end, trying to create tension and friction between herself and Caitlin Clark. And the next thing you know, Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White are arguing on the sideline on the bench. This is an organization built for an agenda, not for doing business, not for bringing out the best in Caitlin Clark and the entire organization. This is about an agenda.
She has not catapulted this league into anything other than a laughingstock, and that's unfortunate. She has capitulated to the worst among us, bullies. She's afraid to lead, and you cannot be in a leadership position and be afraid to lead. It doesn't matter.
There is a story developing around Caitlin Clark and her parents that cuts through all of the noise and all of the institutional language and all of the carefully managed public relations and lands with a kind of human weight that statistics and box scores simply cannot carry. And it deserves to be discussed with the honesty and the seriousness that the people at its center have earned through everything they have experienced during this period. Caitlin Clark's parents are no longer attending Indiana Fever games. Let that land before moving to anything else. Because if you were following women's college basketball during the Iowa years, you know exactly what that absence represents. Her parents were at every game. Every game. The camera found them regularly. Their presence was part of the fabric of following Clark's career, part of the community that formed around watching her play, part of the human story that made the Iowa era feel like something more than athletic competition. They were there, consistently, visibly, invested in every possession. And now they are not attending Indiana Fever games because, as Clark herself acknowledged in a direct and honest moment with the media, the environment surrounding her professional career has become something her parents struggle to witness in person. The physical targeting, the officiating patterns, the organizational dynamics, the broader institutional environment that has produced documented incidents, congressional letters, international media coverage, and sustained national controversy around the treatment of their daughter. All of it has created a situation where the people who raised Caitlin Clark, who watched her develop from a young athlete into the most commercially transformative player in the history of this sport, cannot bring themselves to sit in the stands and watch what happens to her on a professional basketball court. Clark spoke about this with characteristic restraint and characteristic generosity toward the league and toward the human complexity of the situation. She acknowledged that her parents have feelings. She said she does not think people have fully taken that into account. She noted that she has developed the ability to block out the external environment, that being in this position requires that skill or it will eventually break you, but that her parents do not have the same professional necessity to develop that protective distance. Her parents see their daughter being targeted. They see the fouls that go uncalled. They see the physical conduct that has generated congressional intervention. They see the organizational decisions that observers have characterized as failing to protect her competitive interests. And they have made a quiet but unmistakable decision about how much of that they can absorb in person. That is not a small thing. That is a family communicating through their absence what they cannot say publicly without creating additional controversy for the daughter they are trying to protect. Their absence from the stands is a statement. It is the kind of statement that people who love someone make when words would cost that person too much. The fact that this is where things have reached, that the family of the player who has done more for this league's commercial growth and cultural visibility than any athlete in its history cannot bring themselves to attend games in person, is something the WNBA's institutional leadership needs to sit with in its full gravity. Not as a media story to be managed, as a human reality that reflects exactly how far the institutional failures surrounding Clark's situation have accumulated and compounded. Now let us turn to Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, because the accountability dimension of this conversation has its own urgency and its own set of facts that require direct examination. Dan Dockich, whose previous positions on this situation involved defending institutional arrangements that many observers found indefensible, has now publicly criticized Engelbert in terms that reflect the kind of shift we have been seeing across the media landscape, as the weight of documented evidence becomes impossible for even previously aligned voices to accommodate.
What if the of the WNBA to resign? She is incapable of providing strong leadership. She has not catapulted this league into anything other than a laughingstock. Every damn thing this woman touched, it turned into a PR nightmare. That's exactly what happens with the WNBA. Is it time for the commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, to get shit? That she is incapable of providing Engelbert, the commissioner, casino, is happening. It's time for Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA, to resign. It's time. I'm sorry, it's time. She's proven time and time again that she is incapable of providing strong leadership. What if the WNBA had a strong leader? What if the WNBA had somebody that said, ladies, this is what the hell we're going to do? I don't give a damn if it's a male or a female. What if they had a David Stern type individual that could rule the roost over what's happening there? You know, every week there is a new freaking controversy. Every week there is something silly. Every week there is something that drives fans away. Controversies are okay, but they can't be continuous. They can't be exhausting, and we can't get fatigue from them in sports. And that's exactly what happens with the WNBA. She's got the biggest star in the league, unprecedented attention on her league, and yet nowhere to be heard. She has not catapulted this league into anything other than a laughingstock.
His assessment of Engelbert's performance during this period of the Clark era is pointed, direct, and consistent with what a broad coalition of analysts, commentators, fans, and now elected federal officials have been saying for weeks. The commissioner has been hiding. That is the specific characterization being used, and it is not an unfair one when examined against the observable record of her public engagement with this situation. Since the CBA was finalized, since the period during which Nafisa Collier and the Players Association publicly and directly criticized Engelbert's leadership, the commissioner has been operating with a visibility profile that does not match the scale of the institutional crisis unfolding under her watch. When incidents involving Clark generated national and international headlines, Engelbert did not appear publicly with the kind of forceful, specific, and accountable communication that the situation demanded. When congressional representatives sent formal letters demanding accountability for documented physical incidents, the institutional response was not led by the commissioner stepping into the public spotlight to address those demands directly and transparently. When the story moved beyond sports media, into Fox News, into international outlets, into the congressional record, the face of the organization whose policies and disciplinary decisions were being scrutinized remained largely absent from the kind of prominent and direct public engagement that institutional crises typically require from the people at the top. Every time Engelbert has emerged from that operational quiet, the response has been pointed, unified, and critical from across the spectrum of observers covering this situation. That pattern is itself an explanation for the low profile. When stepping into public view produces immediate and sustained criticism rather than the kind of institutional credibility restoration that press appearances are supposed to generate, the strategic calculation towards staying out of the spotlight becomes understandable, if not acceptable. But acceptable and understandable are not the same thing. And the option of staying out of the spotlight while the institution you lead navigates one of its most consequential and publicly visible crisis periods is not a leadership option. It is a leadership abdication. The congressional attention that has accompanied this situation is not going away because Engelbert remains quiet. The 11 Republican members of Congress who sent the formal letter demanding accountability created a documented record that exists independently of any commissioner communication strategy. The letter asks specific questions about specific documented incidents. Those questions have not received the kind of specific and transparent public responses that the formal nature of congressional inquiry typically demands. Lead, follow, or get out of the way. That formulation has been applied to this specific situation by commentators who previously were not among the voices most critical of this institutional leadership. When that kind of commentary starts coming from those specific directions, it is a sign that the position has become analytically untenable, even for observers who were previously inclined toward charitable interpretations of institutional decision-making. The job the commissioner's office has done during the Caitlin Clark era, specifically in terms of protecting the player whose commercial impact has been most transformative for the league, managing the disciplinary situations that have arisen around her treatment, communicating transparently with the fan base and the media about institutional standards and how they are being applied, and providing the visible leadership that a professional sports organization requires from its chief executive during periods of sustained public controversy has not met the standard that the moment required. That is not a fan grievance dressed up as institutional analysis. That is the straightforward assessment of observable facts placed against the observable record of institutional response across an extended period. Clark herself has been a model of professional restraint throughout all of it. She has not escalated publicly. She has not named her frustrations in ways that would force the league to respond directly to her critiques. She has stood at podiums and absorbed accountability for outcomes that were not entirely her responsibility. She has represented herself and this league with a consistency of character that deserves recognition specifically because of how little the institutional environment around her has deserved it. She also acknowledged something in her media remarks that speaks directly to the sustainability of the current situation. She said that being in this position requires the ability to block things out, because without that ability, it will eventually break you. That is a player communicating in measured and professional language that the environment she is operating within carries a weight that is genuinely significant, and that maintaining competitive effectiveness in the face of it requires an extraordinary degree of psychological fortitude. She has that fortitude, but the institution that is asking her to exercise it continuously should not be comfortable with the fact that it is necessary. A professional sports organization should not be creating conditions that require its most important player to develop the psychological equivalent of armor just to maintain competitive effectiveness. The fact that she has developed it, and that she continues to perform at a historically unprecedented level despite requiring it, is a testament to her character. It is simultaneously an indictment of the environment that made it necessary. Her parents are not able to maintain that same protective distance. They are not professional athletes navigating the pressures of a public career. They are people who love their daughter and who attend sporting events to share the experience of watching her compete. And the institutional environment surrounding her professional career has made that experience something they can no longer bring themselves to absorb in person. The WNBA has produced this outcome, not as an explicit intention, not as a calculated strategy directed at the Clark family specifically, but as the cumulative product of institutional decisions that failed, repeatedly and at multiple levels, to create and maintain the protective environment that Clark's situation demanded. One-game suspensions that did not deter continued physical conduct, coaching decisions that prioritized other interests over the most important player's competitive well-being, and documented evidence of selective advocacy from the sideline. Officiating patterns that have been documented, challenged by congressional representatives, and covered by international media without adequate institutional response or systemic reform. Commissioner-level leadership that has been absent from the public arena during precisely the periods when visible and forceful institutional accountability was most needed. All of that has accumulated, and it has accumulated to the point where the Clark family's relationship with attending games has been altered, where the parents who were present at every Iowa game, who were part of the texture and the community of watching their daughter compete, are no longer able to bring themselves to witness in person what the professional environment has become. There is no press release that addresses that adequately. There is no carefully worded institutional statement that resolves it. What resolves it is the kind of genuine, sustained, and structurally meaningful change in how this league treats its most important player that has not yet materialized, despite mounting evidence that it is urgently needed. Dokic's assessment of Engelbert, delivered publicly by someone who was not among the original critics of this institutional leadership, adds another voice to a chorus that has grown considerably louder and considerably broader than it was when these concerns first began surfacing. The chorus now includes elected federal officials, international journalists, sports media personalities who previously defended the institutional positions being criticized, and the family of Caitlin Clark, whose relationship with attending games in person communicates more clearly than any public statement could about what this institutional environment has actually cost the people most directly affected by it. Kathy Engelbert's track record during this specific era, across these specific challenges, against the standard that professional sports commissioners are expected to maintain during institutional crisis, has not been adequate. That assessment is not editorial. It is the conclusion that the observable record of this period supports, when examined honestly and without the diplomatic softening that serves institutional comfort rather than institutional accountability. Lead, follow, or get out of the way. That choice is in front of the commissioner. The evidence of which option has been exercised so far is in the public record, and the Clark family's absence from Indiana Fever games in person is among the most human and most telling pieces of that evidence. The institution needs to do better for the player who gave it the greatest commercial opportunity in its history, for the family that supported that player through the journey that brought her here, and for the fan base that showed up in unprecedented numbers and has been watching the institutional response to their presence with a combination of genuine appreciation for the sport and genuine frustration with the organization running it. Better is not impossible, it is just overdue. And every day it is delayed is another day the cost of the delay compounds.